Board of Inquiry into the Hazelwood mine fire is now in session.
Good morning and welcome to the third week of the public hearings of the Hazelwood mine fire inquiry. We've heard from a number of people throughout the first 2 weeks on the origin of and the circumstances of the fires in week 1 and on matters concerning the environment and health of the community in week 2. We've heard evidence that the fires in the mine were complex. The fires took many thousands of people to put out and affected many thousands of others. We've heard from incident controllers, firefighters, a fire behaviour analyst, mine workers, mine management, air quality, health and communication experts, community members, volunteers, Department of Education, Health and Human Services representatives. We've heard from the local council, the Fire Service Commissioner, the Chief Health Officer and many others. We've heard about spotting, predictions, compressed air foam, PM 2.5, 8-hour average readings, carbon monoxide protocols, emergency command structures, travel blankets, emergency response plans, information versus communication, and fire, smoke and ash. The key areas of focus of this inquiry were driven by the terms of reference and the issues raised by the community in the 10 community consultations attended by over 260 people and the 160 submissions received. The information has been presented in this open forum, and the number of folders around the room demonstrate the mass of material that has been provided. We extend our thanks to the many people who have been involved in the inquiry to date, providing information and evidence, and we also recognise the many members of the community taking time to participate in listening to the materials presented, either here in the hearing room or via bulletins in the media. The hearings have been conducted respectfully and the parties have cooperated with the inquiry, and we thank you for your continuing cooperation. The social, environmental and economic impacts of mining, and particularly mining failures, can be significant. We've heard that the fire got into the mine coal seam. Elderly and vulnerable residents were encouraged to temporarily relocate from Morwell, and the remaining community breathed acrid smoke and lived in houses covered with ash. Commencing today, the focus of the inquiry, led by Council assisting Ms Richards and Mr Rosen, will be on mitigation and prevention and regulatory compliance. The evidence will explore whether the risk of fire in the worked out batters of the mine close to the township of Morwell was adequately recognised by people and by those responsible. We will also look at whether the measures taken to control the risk were sufficient and how they might be improved in the future. If no changes are made, then we'll not have learned the lessons of experience and we can expect similar disasters to occur in the future. So for us, another week of listening with open minds. Chairman.
The first witness today will be Kylie White from the Department of State Development and Business Innovation. But before I call Ms White, there are some preliminary matters. There are some changes in appearance. So those council may wish to announce their appearance.
Mr. Board, I now appear in the place of Mr Reardon for GDF Sewers.
Yes.
The Board please resign to appear with Ms Truella for Environment Victoria.
And there's also the matter of firefighter L that I raised with the board on Friday afternoon. Over the weekend, those representing the state, which includes the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, provided the assurance that I requested on Friday afternoon in writing in a letter from the Victorian Government Solicitor. That letter has been provided, or a copy of it has been provided to the United Firefighters Union with a request that it arrange for Firefighter L to get in touch with the inquiry, and if and when that happens, we will take that matter further. I call Kylie White. Ms. White, could you come forward, please?
Please state your full name.
Kylie Ann White.
Please raise the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence that I shall give
to this Board of Inquiry
to this Board of Inquiry
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Ms. White. Welcome.
Thank you.
Can you please tell us your full name again and your professional address?
Kylie Ann White.
And you are currently employed as the Executive Director of Earth Resources Regulation Branch in the Department of State Development, Business and Innovation,
That's correct.
which I will refer to as the Mine Regulator from time to time. It's less of a mouthful. You've made two statements for the inquiry. The first is a statement that's in 2 volumes with 46 attachments and 192 paragraphs. Are you familiar with that statement?
I am.
Are there corrections that you would like to make to it?
Just one matter, and that is that document 46 that was supplied with that was a previous draft, and the final document has been supplied.
All right, that was supplied over the weekend.
That's
and
right.
I believe the substitute document has been circulated to the parties. All right, with that correction, is your statement true and correct?
It is, yes.
Then you made a supplementary statement that was provided to the inquiry in the course of last week. And the main purpose of that statement was to provide the inquiry with some additional information about the basis on which the rehabilitation bond for the Hazelwood mine was assessed in 1995.
That's right. We're able to find more information.
And you also took the opportunity to provide some clearer copies of a number of documents that were annexed to your first statement. Are there any corrections that you would like to make to that supplementary statement?
No.
Is that true and correct?
Yes.
I tend to both of those statements, if I might. Now, Ms. White, a good place to begin our discussion is probably to ask you about your role and responsibilities as Executive Director of the Earth Resources Regulation Branch. What does your role involve?
As the Executive Director of that branch, I'm responsible for implementing a number of legislations that relate to mining, quarrying, petroleum and other related matters, but particularly for this inquiry, I'm responsible for the regulation of the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act, or MRSD.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit about your own background. You've been in your current position since July 2013. Where did you come from? What was your previous employment in the Victorian Public Service?
Prior to that, I had been in the Department of Primary Industries, and then prior to that, the Department of Sustainability and Environment.
And the 1st of July 2013 was the date on which mine regulation transferred from the Department of Primary Industries to DSDBI, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what had been your role with the Department of Primary Industries prior to moving into your current role?
Prior to that, I was a director in the Earth Resources Development Branch with a range of responsibilities relating to petroleum and mining.
And going back further in time, your experience has been in the forestry regulation area?
I've spent a considerable time working in forest-related matters, and forest regulation was part of those duties, yes.
And you have a number of formal qualifications, most recently graduate of the Advanced Management Program from the Harvard Business School.
That's correct.
And your undergraduate and master's degrees are in science,
That's
with a focus on environmental management. You've provided us at attachment 1 with an organisational chart of DSDBI. If we could have that on the screen, just to locate you in the scheme of things. So on the left-hand side of the chart, there is an energy and earth resources division. Now, that's not where you're located, is that correct?
That is correct.
You are in the Corporate Planning and Compliance Services division under Deputy Secretary Rob Barr. And if we can just move the chart up a little bit, and we will see right at the very bottom of that column, there's the Earth Resources Regulation branch. What's the relationship between your branch and energy and earth resources?
We have responsibilities under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act. However, as the regulator, I am separate from what is seen as the development or facilitative arm of earth resources development. So there is a structural model that enables greater independence of the regulator, being myself and my team.
Now, there's a range of powers and functions and decisions that fall to be made under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act. Are they all collected within your branch, or are they divided between the two parts?
The administration of the regulatory framework is contained within Earth Resources Regulation branch.
All right, so that includes advice about granting a licence, approval of work plans and work plan variations, rehabilitation bonds, the whole range of decisions
correct.
that fall to be made. Thank you for that clarification. Now, just to be clear about the location of the mine regulator and the responsibility for administering the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act, it currently sits with your branch within DSDBI. Between December 2002 and the end of June 2013, it sat with the Department of Primary Industries.
That's correct.
And from privatisation until December 2002, it sat with the Department of Natural Resources and Environment.
That's correct.
But the practicality has been that there has been a branch or section responsible for mining regulation under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act, and that's moved from department to department over time.
That's correct.
The Act also confers a number of powers on the Minister, and the Minister at the moment is the Minister for Energy and Resources. And I think I see from paragraph 13 of your statement that that's been the title of the relevant Minister since December 2006. There are a number of powers that reside in the Minister and a number of powers that reside in the department head under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act. But to be clear, the Minister's powers include granting a mining licence.
That's
that correct?
Right, yes.
And setting a rehabilitation bond.
Yes.
And requiring the reassessment of that rehabilitation bond.
Yes.
Yeah. The department head is the one who approves a work plan.
Yes.
Have I understood that
Yes.
division of responsibilities correctly? And of course the Chief Inspector of Mines is a separate statutory office who has a number of functions under the Act as well.
That's right.
There is one enforcement power that the Minister has under the Act that I wanted to ask you a little more about, which was the power in Section 110 to issue a stop work notice. I know this is not one of the matters we asked you specifically to address in your statement, but I'm interested to know how that power is exercised in practice.
The Section 110 penalties or the processes for do that have a number of elements, and they generally relate to there is an issue that has been identified, a risk that's to be managed, or a problem, and it's of a serious nature. And a Section 110 notice can then describe the problem and then seek the problem to be mitigated or addressed. The stop work power would be used in only, if you like, extreme situations or when previous notices had not been dealt with.
And those previous notices would be issued by inspectors under the Act? Just to get a sense of the process that would lead up to a stop work notice.
That's right, they would be
being
issued by the Chief Inspector of Mines or one of his delegates.
Right.
Yes.
And one would not expect that drastic step of a stop work notice to be taken without clear advice from the department.
That's correct, yes.
Before I move into the detail of the Hazelwood open cut mine, I just want to ask you a little bit more broadly about the mining industry in Victoria. You tell us in paragraph 15 that it represents about 1% of Victoria's gross state product. So it's not exactly Western Australia here. Of that 1%, is it the case that the vast majority is represented by the 3 open cut coal mines here in the Latrobe Valley?
I don't think I would describe it as being the vast majority. There are a range of other mines and other mining activities across Victoria, gold being one. However, there is a concentration there is a concentration of large coal mines here in the Latrobe Valley.
Yes, not the only coal mines in Victoria. We're aware that there's one at Anglesea.
Yes.
But these 3 mines here in and around Morwell are the largest mines in Victoria, are they not?
They are the largest mines, yes.
By quite a long stretch.
In size, yes.
In size and in terms of the number of people employed?
I'm not familiar exactly with their employment details, but they do, because of their complexity and the scale, they would employ many people. I'm aware of that, yes.
Now, in Part B of your statement, you've set out a very helpful summary of the regulatory scheme that exists under the various legislation, but most particularly under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act and the regulations made under that Act. There's only a couple of things that I would really like to explore with you. In paragraph 29, you tell us the requirements that the minister must be satisfied of before an applicant can be issued with a mining licence. And then at paragraph 30, you list the various conditions that may be imposed on a licence. At paragraph K, one of those is payment of royalties other than in respect of lignite. Now, lignite is brown coal. Do I understand that correctly to mean that royalties are not paid on brown coal under a mining licence?
There are royalties, but it's set specifically for lignite, so they are separated out from the other matters relating to mining. So, for example, payment of royalties for something like antimony is determined in this methodology, but the royalties for lignite has been determined separately.
By what method?
I'm not familiar with the method, but it has been determined separately, and I can provide more details if you would like.
The board's interested to have some idea of the magnitude of the royalties that, an order of magnitude figure of the royalties that are paid by by Hazelwood each year. Are you able to assist with that?
The three mines collectively, it's somewhere in the vicinity of $50 to $60 million. I can clarify that to give you a most recent figure.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Starting on page 9 of your statement, you...
Sorry, Ms Richards, just to elaborate, please. Ms White, thank you for that clarification. So are there any other fees paid to the Victorian Government, or is it only the royalties?
I believe there are only royalties. I'd need to determine if there were some fees as well related to other matters relating to this mining licence.
So if your response could just cover the royalties and any other fees, that'd be great. Thank you.
So moving to the details of this mining licence, you set out, starting at paragraph 32, the various constituent parts of the mining licence that's currently in place. The mining licence was first approved in May 1996, and that was a licence to the publicly owned Hazelwood Power Corporation. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes, and then that was revoked and essentially reissued to Hazelwood Power Corporation Limited, which is privately owned, in September 1996.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Now, there was a gazettal which you've annexed at attachment 3 of the mining licence and the approved work plan that went with that licence. I just want to be clear about exactly what this authorised. So if we can go to the first page of Annexure 3. So it's a recommendation, and over the page there's an order granting the mining licence, which includes an approval at paragraph 3B of the work plan. And if we can just be clear about what the work plan was that was approved, at page 12 of that document, there's an authority to commence work as per work plan dated 1st of June 1995. And then at page 52 of the document, it's the front cover of a Hazelwood Power Corporation mining licence application work plan submission. And then in the following pages, there's a detailed work plan set out. Is this the work plan that was approved in September 1996?
It is my understanding that that's the case.
Okay. So to go straight to the areas that are of most interest to the inquiry, at page 63, we deal with, or the work plan deals with the bushfire mitigation program, and there is a recognition that the mine is situated in a high bushfire risk area, and of the potential consequences on the mine infrastructure of a bushfire. There's a bushfire mitigation program that's funded, and also it conforms with the fire service policy and code of practice that we're familiar with now. And then at 7.7 there's a fire protection policy, which again refers to the fire service policy and code of practice, and then identifies an extensive network of water reticulation and sprays for fire protection, and refers to figure 13.A, which is the fire service network schematic. So that's what I've found in the work plan that deals with fire protection. Is there anything else that we should refer to?
I'm not aware of anything else for that work plan.
Right, and then the last step in this is to look at figure 13 capital A, which is on page 89 of the document. and it's a little difficult to read, but it is, with the aid of a magnifying glass, the fire service pipe network that's referred to, which shows a pipe network extending all around the perimeter of the mine and more extensively into the working area of the mine. So the question now is this. Am I right in expecting that any change to the fire services network or the fire protection policy would have to be by way of a variation to the approved work plan?
At that time, if it was included in the work plan, and you've made note that it is, then that would be the case.
At paragraph 43 and following in your statement, you step through the various variations to the work plan that have been made since 1996. And there have been 7 in total since that September 1996 variation. The September 1996 gazettal. And you've given a broad description of the subject matter of each variation, and I've looked through them. I can't find any variations that approve a variation to the fire services pipe network. Now, I don't expect you to be able to point me to one immediately today, but can you take that as a question on notice, if you like, to identify whether there's ever been any approval of changes to the fire service pipe network in the mine's work plan?
I can determine that up to the point at which my responsibilities lie, and I think just to clarify, matters relating to what would be occupational health and safety changed in regards to who oversighted those aspects from 2002, but more subsequently from 2008.
All right, so is your evidence that when those changes were made to the regulation of occupational health and safety, that responsibility for approving the fire protection measures in the work plan moved away from the mine regulator?
I think, I don't know whether I would like to see it in such a defined way, but how I would describe it is DSDBI, or Earth Resources Regulation, is one of the mining regulators. We're not the mining regulator, and that DSDBI in this case is responsible for matters relating to the work plan. But since 2008, the work plan has not included occupational health and safety, which has been under the responsibility of the Victorian Work Cover Authority and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That's just what I was trying to clarify. As I can go back through our records and determine whether there has been anything up until that time that relates to the fire infrastructure.
All right, I'd be grateful if you would do that, if you could identify whether there was any variation to the fire services pipe network that was approved with a work plan variation. I don't expect that you'll find one given what I've looked through, but you may know where to look better than we do.
I believe that we've provided a full account of all the variations.
Now, the latest work plan variation, and this was a very substantial one, took place in 2009, and you've provided it at Annexure 12 to your statement. And this was the culmination of a very long approval process, was it not, that had commenced in 2004 or 2005?
Post the EES that was done for the extension of the coal mine.
Yes. Now, the extent of the approval is probably best captured by looking at figure 2.1, which is on page. The pages are unhelpfully not numbered sequentially. page 2-3 on the bottom. It should be on page 14 of the document. So this is a depiction of the mine licence boundaries as they now are. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And they were extended as a part of this process that ended with the approval in 2009 of the work plan variation.
That's right. It was the subject of an EES and then was clarified with the extension and amalgamation of mining licences and then a subsequent work plan.
So there were 4 new mining licences granted in the several years leading up to 2009 that were amalgamated into mining licence 5004, and that amalgamation occurred in about 2006.
Prior to this work plan being issued, yes.
All right, so that's the current boundaries, and the area outlined in white is the area of new work that's approved in this work plan variation.
That's right.
We'll come back to this document a couple of times this morning, but if we can return to your statement now, to paragraph 52 in particular. And you refer there, as I understand it, to the interaction between the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act and the Planning and Environment Act. Have I understood that correctly?
That's right, yes.
It's a difficult interaction to understand. Are you able to explain how it works in practice? There are some things that are the mining regulators' responsibility and other things that are the responsibility of the planning authorities. What's the dividing line?
I think it would be best to ask somebody who's competent in the Planning and Environment Act and so can provide you with the details. But in regards to this particular mine and this situation, the environmental effects statement and the panel report set the determination, or if you like, the guidelines for how this mine was to proceed or to be developed. And so we were able, and so the MRSDA in this case has, if you like, then abuts the environmental effects statement process and creates or details the working operation of the mine once the panel report has been provided.
If I can put it to you this way, approval of mining and mining operation is very much the province of the mine regulator. Approval of other changes that had to be made, for example, the diversion of the Morwell River, was not the mining regulator's province, it was the province of the planning process more broadly.
And also matters relating to Southern Rural Water or those departments with water responsibilities.
All right, and the particular provision that identifies the boundary line is section 42 capital A of the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act. But have I understood correctly that in terms of what goes on inside the mine, the mining activity, planning authorities do not have any jurisdiction over that under the Planning and Environment Act?
Once the area is, well, in this case, the mining licence is, or the activities, could I put it that way, the activities as defined under the MRSDA are determined or oversighted by Earth Resources regulations. And then there are other regulators that may have other responsibilities, such as OH&S, or there could be matters relating to discharge, which the EPA would have some involvement with. And so there are a number of aspects of what would happen within that area that would have some oversight from a range of agencies.
But the Latrobe City Council, as the responsible authority within the Latrobe municipality does not have any approval power over mining activities within the mining licence boundaries.
Not so much the mining activities, but the area had already been previously identified as being an area set aside for coal mining or coal winning activities. Yeah.
You tell us in paragraph 54 53 and 54 that Hazelwood has an application pending to vary the work plan, and Mr Faithful in his statement has provided a copy of the application. One of the aspects of it is to refine mining sequencing and batter rehabilitation, and we'll come in a little while to what the current rehabilitation plan requires in terms of the stages of rehabilitation. Is there any proposal to change that sequencing, to delay the completion of rehabilitation under the current application?
I don't believe that delaying the rehabilitation is what's being sought in that variation. Rehabilitation, according to the MRSDA, relates to how the mine is to be left in a stable and safe situation at the end of mine life. So for the rehabilitation plan that GDF Sewers is required to provide to us, it would still have to meet all those requirements.
Right, but there is already in place a detailed rehabilitation plan with some dates by which certain works must be completed. And my question now is really to identify whether this application seeks to move those dates or to change the work that must be completed by those milestones.
My understanding is GDF Sewers have sought a revision or a variation to their work plan to accommodate a slightly different model of how they would like to mine the coal going forward. And in addition to that, they are required to provide some additional hydrogeological or geotechnical requirements relating to mine stability, and they wish to include those as required by legislation.
All right, but that doesn't answer my question about the sequencing. Whether there's and I'll pursue this also with Mr Faithful when he gives evidence, but there is currently an application that you tell us seeks to refine mining sequencing and batter rehabilitation. And we know that at present the rehabilitation plan has a 4-stage approach to rehabilitation, and there are dates by which the progressive rehabilitation must be completed. Is the current application seeking to defer completion of that staged rehabilitation work?
We haven't yet assessed the variation, but I don't believe it's to defer the rehabilitation. But I will I'll clarify that. What I would say though is that it is not uncommon for mining sequencing to be varied over time as the mine operator determines what's the best way to win the coal. They have also identified, Mr Faithful's statement also identified, again, if you like, reiterated what it had been in the previous statement around the suitability of materials for certain forms of rehabilitation, and I think he clarifies that once more in that statement.
All right, and that relates to the overburden and where it can be placed within the mine?
Yes, based on the characteristics of the overburden.
Moving to the next section of your statement, paragraph 55 and 56, we asked you to identify the role or responsibility that the mine regulator plays in mitigating the risk of fire in the mine, and how you work with other agencies. And we asked you specifically whether the mine regulator participates in integrated fire management planning, either at state, regional or local level. And you've given a very definitive answer. The answer is we do not participate in integrated fire management planning, and that since the 1st of January 2008, the responsibility for mitigating the risk of fire at the Hazelwood mine has been the Victorian Work Cover Authorities. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so as you sit here, you do not regard any part of the mine regulator's responsibility to be mitigating the risk of fire at the mine?
I believe that is the case, and so yes, that is correct. I just would like to clarify that there is one part of the MRSDA that seeks for a mine operator to notify DSDBI, Chief Inspector of Mines, of a fire in the mine, but that's the only other requirement.
Yes, I'll come to that in a little while. All right, now specifically in relation to integrated fire management planning, there's a document that I'd like to take you to now that is an annexure to Mr Lapsley's first statement. It's the Gippsland Strategic Fire Management Plan for 2013 to 2023, dated the 30th of June 2013. It's annexure 38 to Mr Lapsley's first statement, referred to at paragraph 210 of his of that statement. Is this a document that you're at all familiar with?
I've become aware of this document after the fire, yes.
So in the course of this inquiry, or after more earlier than that?
I can't be definitive, but I'd say earlier than the course of this inquiry.
All right. It wasn't a document, I take it, that the mine regulator had any part in developing?
That's my understanding, yes.
All right. Now, if I can take you to attachment A to that statement, which appears on page 27. This is a regional register of assets at risk. And if we could expand, please, the top two lines on the table.
It says, which top two lines? Is it power generation facilities that you're referring
yes, so
to?
there's power generation facilities, and then below that there's power generation facilities coal mines.
Yes.
So these two facilities are top of the Gippsland Region's Register of Assets at Risk. And we see there that there's an identification that there is a risk that bushfire will threaten the coal mines, potential for fire in the mines as a result of either an internal or external fire event, disruption, medium to long-term loss of power to the national grid. The likelihood is identified as likely, the consequences are identified as catastrophic, and hence the risk rating is extreme. What I want to ask you about is the existing treatments that are identified in that next column. And the last one relates to DPI regulatory planning. Now, as at the 30th of June 2013, it was still DPI, was it not? That was the mine regulator. Can you give any content to the treatment that's identified in this risk register?
No, I can't verify that the content in that particular register is something that we would have contributed. I'm not aware of that.
All right. And your evidence is that DPI from the 1st of January 2009 did not play any role in mitigating fire risk at the mine.
1st of January 2008.
2008, I beg your pardon.
That's correct. Those matters, for example, fire in a mine is a prescribed, is a mining hazard as prescribed under the OH&S Act.
All right. So your evidence would be that of the existing treatments that are listed, DPI regulatory planning is not one that has any real content.
Not specifically for fire mitigation or for matters relating to fire suppression activities, no.
Thank you. We can put that document aside now. Moving to Part C of your statement, you've provided us with a very clear history of the transfer of health and safety responsibilities from the mine regulator to the Victorian Work Cover Authority. Just to extract the gist of it, from 2002 to 2007, the Mineral Resources Development Regulations required work plans to include an occupational health and safety plan. Is that correct?
Just let me check whether it's 2007 or whether they were the Mineral Resources Health and Safety in Large Open Cut Mines regulations were repealed in 2002 and then replaced. So that's my only clarification.
All right, so they were repealed and replaced by those two regulations that you list in paragraph 58.
Yes.
So both Occupational Health and Safety Mines regulations and the Mineral Resources Development regulations. And the latter set of regulations continue to require health and safety to be the subject of a work plan or to be covered by a work plan. But there were also broader health and safety responsibilities that resided in the Victorian Work Cover Authority.
That's correct, yes.
And from 2002 until the change at the beginning of 2008, those responsibilities were delegated by the Victorian Work Cover Authority to DPI.
That's correct, yes.
There was then, as you've identified at paragraph 61, a review of that arrangement, and you've provided us with a copy of Mr Pope's review, but to cut a fairly long story short, he recommended that the Victorian Work Cover Authority should resume responsibility for health and safety in mines and should be delegated responsibility for the assessment of health and safety requirements of work plans.
That's right, yes.
So does it still remain the case that work plans must contain a health and safety component?
They're no longer required. They were amended in 2010.
That was amended in 2010 and it's about to be amended, or it has been amended again, and it's about, well, the year after next, there will be a new set of requirements for work plans.
That's correct, yes, but they won't include matters relating to occupational health and safety.
Not specifically, although there will be some broader requirements to identify risk and identify measures to control risk.
The amendments are around, these are the proposed amendments to come into place by or before 2016, moving the work plan as it currently is described as a more prescriptive work plan to one that is more outcomes focused or fits more with a risk-based regulatory regime.
All right, so since 2010 there's not been a requirement for a work plan to address health and safety, but prior to it there was.
That's right, but I just would clarify that in 2008, excuse me, when the regulations changed and the delegations were taken back by VWA, there was a delay in amending the regulations just through administrative processes. In amending the...
Sorry, take your time, have another...
In amending the regulations that relate to that element that was still there until 2010, it had been superseded before that in 2008.
Right, so the intent was that work plans would not require or would not have to include a health and safety plan, but the regulations didn't actually follow that intent until 2010. Have I understood that correctly?
That's correct, but the 2009 work plan variation, you see, did include that aspect of the requirements because the regulations required it up until 2010, until they were replaced.
I see.
Yeah.
And so was it the case that during that period when the regulations hadn't yet followed the intent, that the Victorian Work Cover Authority had the responsibility for assessing health and safety requirements of work plans?
They did.
and because that's no longer a requirement of a work plan, that's no longer one of the Victorian Work Cover Authority's responsibilities.
No, they administer it through their own regulations.
Through their own regulations. Now, there's just one aspect of the transition that I'd like to explore with you. Mr Pope, as well as making the recommendations that you set out at paragraph 61, made a number of recommendations about how the transition of responsibility should be affected. And at recommendation 7, this document's at attachment 15 to your statement, and the recommendations are set out starting at page 122. Recommendation 7, which is on the top of the second of those pages, there's a recommendation that the staffing of this unit, which is a new unit to be established within the Victorian Work Cover Authority, should include the transfer from the DPI of at least 2 qualified mining engineers and all regulation officers currently within the Minerals and Extractive Operations branch. Now, you tell us in paragraph 79 of your statement that only one staff member transferred from DPI to the Victorian Work Cover Authority. Are you able to tell us why the transfer of staff and presumably expertise didn't occur as Mr Pope had recommended?
I'm not familiar with all the details relating to that time. I can assume, however, that VWA and the then DPI determined that that was all that was required, that they reached an agreement about that.
Are you able to provide any more insight into the reasons behind that agreement?
I'm afraid I'm not.
Do you think you'd be able to find out? Is there anyone who can tell you now?
I was going to say, other than I could investigate further. We have provided some documentation that relates to the transfer arrangements and the considerations that were taken at that time. But as to the determination of one staff member versus others, I'll have to see if there's further information.
Because there's a clear recognition that DPI has accumulated a good deal of experience and knowledge and presumably wisdom about this regulation of health and safety in the mining industry, and it would be useful to transfer that to the authority that's going to be responsible for regulation in future. And it appears that that didn't occur, and we'd be interested in finding out the reasons for that. All right, so we'll add that to the list, and we'll correspond with the Victorian Government Solicitor about matters for follow-up. You've set out in your statement a series of memorandums of understanding between the mine regulator and the Victorian Work Cover Authority, and I'd just like to ask you about the operation of the current one. You refer to it at paragraph 80, and then you extract, helpfully, the relevant parts of it at paragraphs 81 and 82. So there's an explicit recognition, is there not, that there is some overlapping of responsibilities in this memorandum of understanding?
There was a recognition that there could be those areas of overlap, and they were best identified and then determined an approach to dealing with them, yes.
Right. And there are various safety-related elements that are listed in the left-hand column of that table under paragraph 1.2.2. Just ask you about the first two. Public safety and amenity. The mine regulator is the lead agency, and WorkSafe, as it was then known, is the support agency. And then public safety, work-related. The position's reversed. The mine regulator is the support agency and WorkSafe Victoria is the lead agency. Can you explain how that division of responsibility works in relation to public safety issues connected with the worked out matters of the mine? Who's the lead agency? Who's the support agency?
In regards to and I'll put my comments in the context of the MRSDA. Public safety, as applied to the mine area itself, and then I'll come back to the Northern Batters, relates to or has been described as matters relating to safe access, gates, fencing, ensuring that the site is secure and that, if you like, the public are not put unnecessarily at risk from being able to enter the site or be impacted by what's happening. And there's another aspect which relates to mine stability or the need to be able to ensure that, for example, the Northern Batters, which are terminal batters, that means they're not going to be worked any further, that those batters are seen to be stable and don't pose a risk to the public.
Right, so those are issues on which you would identify your branch as the lead agency. What's the difference between those, public safety and amenity, and public safety work related, with a specific focus on the worked out batters?
The batters may not be batters that are currently winning coal, but they still perform a range of functions, or they are adjacent to existing infrastructure that is still utilised as part of the mine. Mm-hmm. So even though the batters are not currently being worked, and they won't be further worked, the infrastructure that is on the batters or adjacent to the batters is still part of the working mine.
All right, so I understand that while they're worked out, they're still part of an operating mine.
Yeah.
There are roads, there is a conveyor belt, there are pumping stations, there's pipes. But my question was, what's the distinction between public safety and amenity and public safety brackets work related?
My understanding of that distinction is that where matters related to works, that public safety that could be impacted by the works within the mine would be the responsibility of VWA.
And by which you mean?
It's a work site, it has workers, and it would have all the requirements of what would be covered by the Occupational Health and Safety Act instead of the MRSDA. That is my interpretation of what that table is attempting to resolve. I think also the table has used, has in a way wanted to be able to distinguish between the responsibility of each agency in regards to, for example, the matters pertaining to the mine and its impact to people that may perhaps be at risk if they wanted to enter the mine, or in the case of public safety, for us as Earth Resources Regulation Branch, as to relating to ensuring that the terminal batters are stable and safe in the longer term.
All right, well, none of that's spelled out in this table, is it?
No, it's not.
See,
it is a summary.
There's a separate aspect to public safety, particularly with the Hazelwood mine, which is that people live and work and go to kindergarten a few hundred metres from the Northern Batters. Who's responsible under this memorandum of understanding for managing that risk?
I don't believe I can comment and say that I am responsible to the risks to the. Did you say a childcare centre? That's in the proximity.
The public are just a few hundred metres from the Northern Batters.
But I do know that in the work plan that we currently regulate matters relating to noise and dust are regulated within the MRSDA. So I'd confine my understanding of what I'm required to do within the context of the MRSDA. However, I would also add that the stability of the Northern Batter, which has been I think of great concern since, or for many years, but didn't quite. But since 2011 in particular, but prior to that, because the batter has been monitored for many years, has been around oversighting works that GDF Sewers have done in order to keep that batter as stable as possible.
All right, and the lead agency for batter stability issues is the mine regulator?
That's right, yes, particularly in regards to terminal batters, where they are internal and they may affect occupational health and safety aspects, so that workers working adjacent to them, then the VWA would also have an interest in. I think some of their documentation shows that they have an interest in mine stability as well. Yeah.
So the lead agency for managing fire risk in the worked out batters is who?
My understanding would be VWA.
And is that regardless of whether the fire affects people working in the mine or the public who live and work and go to kindergarten on the other side of the boundary?
My understanding after reading the Occupational Health and Safety Act is that there is primarily a matter relating to impacts or adverse impacts to workers and others within the mining area, but there is also recognition of impacts outside of the workplace.
And that's section 23 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act you're referring to, risks arising from the undertaking.
I would have to defer to your knowledge of the section of the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
I appreciate it's not your act. The point of this discussion really is that this table provides a highly generalised division of responsibilities between agencies that have overlapping areas of responsibility. Do you agree?
I think it's a way of being able to categorising a number of elements and then being able to determine over time how each regulator is best able to address the full range of things in this table.
And it does run the risk, does it not, that difficult areas to regulate may fall between the gaps?
I don't know whether I would describe it as difficult areas of regulation that would fall between the gaps. I think, and this is my observations and my working with VWA and with my inspectorate, is they understand the complexity and the major risks of that such a mine as Hazelwood poses. And so I don't think it's seen as a way of being able to or could enable major risks to fall through the cracks. I think its approach was to ensure that, or this table was identified as being areas of possible overlap, and we needed to come to an arrangement to effectively review these areas or oversight these areas.
Well, when I say difficult areas of regulation, I'm referring specifically to the risk of the worked out batters catching fire. Would you not identify that as a difficult area of regulation?
I would identify, and of course what we now know since the fires of February is that the risk of those worked out batters catching fire was real. Yes.
Well, it was already real. There'd been fires in worked out batters in 2005 and in 2008.
There had been fires, but they had been, without wanting to say a fire is not a fire is not a fire, there were some differences to those fires, and I think the fires of February, with my understanding, suggested a fire at a much greater scale and outside of the knowledge of those that have been regulating to date.
Because it burned for longer and involved more of the mine?
And that its origins and if you like the extent, yes.
Well, there's nothing new about an open cut coal mine being threatened by external fire, is there?
I believe that they are at risk. Yes. Yes.
That has been identified since at least 1944, with the fire in the Yallourn mine that was the subject of the Stretton Royal Commission. It's identified in the Regional Strategic Fire Management Plan that I just took you to, and it's identified in the mine's own fire services policy and code of practice. It's not a new idea that an open cut coal mine might be threatened by an external bushfire.
No.
And nor is it a new idea that the worked out batters might catch fire?
No, I believe you'd be able to see some of the documentation that's in that fire policy and code that would refer to ways and means of being able to suppress or prevent fires in the worked out areas.
We'll come in some detail to that with other witnesses later in the week. But these are not. It's not a risk that no one had recognised before February 2014, is it?
I can only comment about really my expertise and also within the parameters of the MRSDA, and that given that it's not a consideration for me as the regulator, that it doesn't factor into our kind of oversight. However, I can't be unaware of the other considerations that relate to fire that the mine operator and other regulators consider as well.
All right. So your interpretation of this table is that in relation to the risk of the worked out batters catching fire, whether from an internal source of ignition or an external fire, that Victorian Work Cover Authority is the lead agency.
I would still see all the area within the mining licence as being a workplace. As people still use it, they still work in it, and therefore I would include those batters as part of the work site, yes.
Okay. So the answer to that question was yes?
Yes.
Ms Richards, before you move on, are you still continuing?
Please.
Ms White, the two bottom safety-related elements there, site rehabilitation planning and site rehabilitation activity, the table indicates that the DPI are the lead agency. Would site rehabilitation cover fire mitigation?
In the case of the MRSDA, no, it doesn't include fire mitigation, other than in the post-mine end-of-life considerations along the lines of what the site looks like and and how to manage the risks post the mine life.
So what does site rehabilitation mean?
Site rehabilitation under the legislation and the regulations refers to end of mine life, that at the end of mine life a mine be safe and stable and reflect a sustainable landscape. In some cases the legislation refers to if the area can be returned to agricultural purposes, that it be done that way, but in this case that wouldn't be a requirement given the level of disturbance. So it's focused around being able to have a safe site that could be put to another use at the end of the mine life.
And your understanding of what year that is?
The current timeline is about 2032.
So would you agree there's an area of vulnerability between the year whenever this mine licence, the plan was granted in 2009, and the year 2032?
For rehabilitation, according to the MRSDA and regulation, it's about progressive rehabilitation to ensure a safe and stable environment. If you're referring to fire mitigation, can I clarify, or fire risk identification? It's not currently included in the rehabilitation plan, and it's not in the MRSDA. That's not to say that following this inquiry or with further discussions with fire experts, it couldn't be included in the future.
So have you had discussions along those lines since this particular outbreak of fire then?
Of course, we've had a lot of discussions about the fire and the mine and the possible ways of being able to minimise the risk in the future. I think from my perspective, the current framework, it means that being able to, if you like, further those discussions, it would mean, I think, a more formal approach with the VWA and perhaps the fire services to best deal with this matter and bring all the expertise to the table. We don't regulate fire, we don't have fire expertise, and then we would also discuss the other, if you like, conditions or constraints that we're aware of to be able to get the best approach going forward. So we've had, if you like, I haven't had formal discussions with the VWA or the Fire Services Commissioner, but informally, of course, we've looked at this situation and looked at how it could happen, whether fire, we've had, just, if you like, the questions of whether it would be possible to have fire mitigation included in the rehabilitation plan.
It seems pretty amazing that something that's as large as the current mine and its a combustible nature doesn't have any regulation about fire mitigation.
Not in the legislation relating to the MRSDA, but there is in the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Now, just before I leave this memorandum of understanding between the mine regulator and Victorian Work Cover Authority, at paragraph 82, you've extracted clause 1.3, which governs the provision of advice. The mine regulator is responsible for advising other agencies, I take it, and the mine operator as well.
That's right.
About sustainable development, including design, safe operating standards, approval of work and operations plan, and protection of people and site rehabilitation. And VWA has responsibility for occupational health and safety, dangerous goods, including explosives and licensing. Where does fire risk mitigation and prevention fit? It could fit comfortably within both of those descriptions.
It could, other than the legislation under the OH&S makes a particular reference to fire.
Right, so you would again say with VWA?
That's my understanding, yes.
Can we turn now to the 2009 work plan variation, which you've annexed as attachment 12 to your statement. Part 9, which is at page 0074, so page 70 or 71, sets out the health and safety management plan. And I think you've explained why that appears in the work plan, notwithstanding the transfer of responsibility for health and safety from the mine regulator to the Victorian Work Cover Authority. And that's because it took a while for the regulations to catch up with the administrative arrangements. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Given that by the time this work plan was approved, the Victorian Work Cover had functional, if not legal, authority, was the health and safety aspect of the work plan referred to the Victorian Work Cover Authority for its assessment and advice?
I actually don't know if that was the case or whether the mine operator provided that directly to the Victorian Work Cover Authority. I'd have to determine the process under which that happened.
Because by this time, the mine regulator's not doing health and safety anymore, is that correct?
That is correct.
So presumably the staff you had who had been involved in health and safety were no longer working in that area. So who assessed the health and safety management aspect of the revised work plan?
I will have to get some information for you about how it was assessed and who. My assumption, though, is given that the changes had already been made, that the VWA would have been involved in that assessment and there would have been requirements under their own legislation and regulations that would have covered the elements in this. But I will clarify that.
Yes, because the 2009 work plan variation was the culmination of a very long process, gone for nearly 5 years, that had the net effect of significantly extending the mine licence area and the area that would be mined into the future. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
And it follows from that approval of the extension of the mine that the worked out batters of the mine would, over time, become a more significant proportion of the mine area.
That's right, and that's why the rehabilitation plan in 2009 provides, if you like, a program for rehabilitation of worked out batters, which prior to that time the rehabilitation plan had really been based on the void would fill with water over a lengthy period of time. So this is really the first time that batters and their rehabilitation for long-term stability has been incorporated.
It's the first time we really see any meat on the bones of the rehabilitation plan.
That's right. Prior to that, it had been fill the cavity or the hole with water and then landscape those areas just out above or beyond that. Yes.
And we'll come to the rehabilitation plan in a moment, but this is a very, very significant step in the life of the mine, the 2009 work plan variation. You're extending the mine by a large amount. The worked out batters are necessarily going to become more because more of the mine will be worked out over time, and the rehabilitation requirements are going to be significantly increased because there's going to be more mine to rehabilitate. It occurs to me that this would have been a good point at which to review the suitability of the Mine Fire Service Policy and Code of Practice. That was a 1980s document. Are you able to identify whether either the mine regulator or the Victorian Work Cover Authority registered that as a necessary part of this overall extension process?
No, I can't answer your question. I don't have the information relating to that. I do know that the last time that our inspectors had looked at that policy code document was in 2007.
And that was in the aftermath of the fire in October 2006?
That's right, yes.
And there was a review of the Mine Fire Service Policy and Code of Practice in light of the recommendations of that review.
That's correct, yes.
But here we're talking about a very significant step in the life of the mine. I take it that the mine regulator didn't say, well, we'd better review the suitability of this policy that's been in place since 1984.
No, my understanding, and I'm just reflecting on the research and information that I've been able to gather, is we weren't involved in a review of such a kind, and we didn't ask for one.
Right, and it might be that the Victorian Work Cover Authority took that opportunity, given that it's squarely within the Health and Safety Management Plan.
I really can't comment on that. I'm not familiar with what VWA might have done.
All right, so there is an area that is squarely within your remit, which is the rehabilitation bond. Clearly there's going to be much more extensive rehabilitation of a much larger mine required. Was there any discussion in 2009 or in the lead up to it of the need to reassess the rehabilitation bond for the mine?
My understanding that was the department looked to review rehabilitation bonds in 2010, so there was an intent to look at that. That was then delayed or subsequently consumed with other matters, and there were a few mine stability issues that the branch dealt with. More recently, we have re-established a review of rehabilitation bonds and the methodology under which they're calculated.
Was that 2010 review prompted by the expansion of the Hazelwood mine in 2009, or the approval of the expansion of the Hazelwood mine?
I understand
or are they separate processes?
Yeah. I understand that there was some consideration at that time. Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, I don't have any more information, but other than my understanding of at that time is that it was considered that with the extension of the mine and the risk, if if you like, the identified risks that a review of the rehabilitation bond should be considered, and it was part of the review was prompted by that.
And is it the case that there is no methodology for assessing rehabilitation bonds?
No, we do have a methodology, a current one, for assessing rehabilitation bonds, but we are currently in the process of reviewing that methodology to see if we can determine a better methodology for better identifying risk and the appropriate way of being able to determine the associated dollar amount.
Why could not the existing methodology be used to conduct at least an interim reassessment of the rehabilitation bond?
Look, I'm not saying that it couldn't. Of course it could, yes.
This extension of the mine was approved nearly 5 years ago, and yet there's been no reassessment of the extent of the rehabilitation bond for a vastly expanded mine. No,
it probably was started and then didn't end up being completed. I would say though that the rehabilitation bond that's held is different to the rehabilitation that GDF sewers are required to do as part of their mining licence and part of the work plan. Mm-hmm. And so regardless, if you like, and I use that term not definitively, but regardless of the bond, they are still required to rehabilitate according to the work plan and the rehabilitation plan, and which may amount to more or less millions to do that work.
And you're referring there, I take it, to their requirement to progressively rehabilitate the mine.
That's right, which is still a requirement of the licence.
All right. Well, why don't we go to what those requirements are? Now, you referred a little earlier to the fact that there was a significant change to the rehabilitation plan with the 2009 work plan variation. It's fair to say that prior to this, the rehabilitation requirements, particularly for the end of the mine's life, had been a bit vague.
There had been a master or concept plan arrangement in place, yes.
Right, I say vague, you say concept plan. But there had been only a fairly general idea that the mine would be filled with water and there would be some landscaping. The specifics hadn't actually been pinned down in any plan.
No, you're quite right. The reference was that there would be filling of the void over many years.
It's going to take a lot of water.
It was going to take a lot of water, and I think at the time or leading into getting the variation approved, so there had been a number of iterations with GDF sewers or discussions with GDF sewers about a revised rehabilitation plan, was that that filling the void may not be achievable and that there may need to be an alternative plan to, if you like, fill the void to a more practicable level or a level that was more likely upon the mine life ending, and then the rehabilitation above that water line, because there still is a plan to have water in the base of the mine, and then above that water line there would be greater deal of rehabilitation to provide a safe and stable environment, and one that would best fit within the landscape.
Right, now, to be clear, you start at paragraph 85 of your statement about rehabilitation of the mine, but you've discussed this already with Ms Petering, but the aim of rehabilitation is to leave the mined area in a safe and stable state that is capable of a non-mining use at the end of the mine life.
That's right,
understood that correctly?
Yeah.
So fire protection is a desirable byproduct of that process, but it's not the main aim of the process.
I think that's probably the right way of categorising it, as that the considerations relating to rehabilitation at the end of mine life would be seen to have that safe and stable environment, and particularly in regards to how the site would be revegetated, that it didn't increase or pose an additional fire risk after that time.
again, returning to attachment 12, if we can go to figure 6.1. Which would be on page 52 of the document, I think. So there are 4 blocks of rehabilitation required under this plan, if I've understood that correctly. And the first of those is that rehabilitation work is to be done in the areas that are marked red on this map at the end of mining of Block 1C, which is marked on the western side of the map. Now, to be clear about the timing of that, Block 1C is in the completion of mining of Block 1C is proposed to be in 2019.
That's right, but once again, that's, if you like, the timing is really dependent on when Block 1C is complete. So there may be a bit of movement in the actual date or time, but that's the objective.
So it might finish earlier, it might finish later, but the intent of this plan is that at the completion of mining of Block 1C, this rehabilitation work will be completed.
That's
our
correct understanding, yes. Just with that though, given that Block 1C, its completion and that some of that overburden would, if you like, be the last overburden or the last suitable overburden, that it would finish maybe a little bit later, but the bulk of it would be done by that time.
But looking at the work plan, the overburden mining is completed some years before the winning of the coal.
That's right.
So the overburden would be available well before the completion of the mining of the coal in 2019.
I don't disagree that all of the overburden would be large. Well, I don't disagree that most of it would be available. I'm just saying there just could be just one last area that at the end of the mine life, at the end of Block C, that would need to be redistributed at that time.
All right, but Mr. Faithful in his statement tells us that the commencement or the rehabilitation work that's marked in red on this map is to commence at the end of Block 1C. Is that your understanding of the timing?
I don't agree with Mr. Faithful's assessment of that.
No, your assessment would be that the rehabilitation work should be completed when Block 1C is completed.
That's our understanding.
All right. So to move through the next diagrams, that's Block 1C, and if things proceed as planned, we can expect to see that rehabilitation work completed in 2019. And then the second block is Block 2B on the following page, and the additional rehabilitation work that's to be completed at the end of that block is marked in blue on that map, and we see there it's the eastern and southeastern batters area, and that is to be completed if things proceed according to the work plan by 2028. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Then the remaining 2 blocks, and we can probably look at this just on figure 6.4 because they're both marked. The yellow is the area to be completed at the end of Block 3, and the green is the area of rehabilitation to be completed at the end of Block 4, which includes the Hazelwood ash retention area in the northeastern corner. But both of those blocks are expected to be completed in 2031. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which is the planned end of the mine.
That's right at this stage.
So we do have a situation where the bulk of the rehabilitation work is to be completed by the end of the forecast mining licence period?
I think we would see that there are a number of parts of the mine that would be rehabilitated during the next, if you like, to the end of the mine life period. And so, if you like, the rehabilitation that's currently underway on the base and then on elements of the eastern and northern batters relate to the overburden that's proposed, and the same goes for each of the, if you like, the steps to rehabilitation by 2031-32.
But in terms of actual work to rehabilitate the batters, including the batters that are currently worked out and won't be mined further, the work that is to be completed in 5 years' time is the work marked red.
Yes.
And then in another 14 years' time, we can expect to see the southern and southeastern batters rehabilitated.
That's correct.
But the bulk of the work is not required to be done until the end of the licence.
The remaining areas that would complete the batter rehabilitation.
Right.
That's correct.
And just to be completely clear, the blank area where there's no colour, the plan is that that will be filled with water, is that correct?
There will be water in the base of the mine there, yes.
Yes, although it's forecast that that will take some years to fill.
That's right. The 2009 plan talks about a level of water that is anticipated within less than a decade, and then it would slowly, perhaps it would fill slowly above that. Previous to that, they were looking at a fill timeline of perhaps up to 500 years to fill the void.
By which time you won't be in your current role.
I'd hope not.
Right, and again, the filling of the void with water is to commence at 2031?
It would. The filling of the void would commence following all of the operations and all of the infrastructure, all of the operations ceasing and all of the infrastructure being removed. There are other considerations, though, and a geotechnical specialist or perhaps GDF Sewers would comment on the need to be able to keep the floor of the mine stable for a period of time so that the pressures from the aquifers below the mine level don't push up through the floor of the mine and then lead to other, if you like, risks to the stability. So over time there would need to be sufficient material put on the floor of the mine, and then water would then fill, and there would still be a period of time where they might need to manage both until it reaches a suitable or safe equilibrium.
The shaping of the batters and the replacement of overburden, most of that work, as I understand the current schedule, is planned to occur in the last 3 years of the licence period.
It will occur, most of the batter shaping will occur at the time of the rehabilitation as indicated, but you've identified that most of the batters are in later years.
Yeah, so there's the areas coloured yellow and green on this map.
That's right.
Just a couple of points of clarification, please. So, Ms White, could we go back to the plan of 6.1, which is the end of Block 1C? And my understanding of what I heard you say was that it was the mine regulator's point of view that those red areas would be completed by 2019?
That's correct, yes.
So could I just get a sense, how long do you think it would take to undertake those bits of work to rehabilitate those red areas?
Parts of those red areas are already under rehabilitation now, so they're already being addressed, and parts have not. So just to point out the most obvious area, overburden is being put on the mine floor in that large triangular piece.
Would you like to use the famous ruler with the sticky thing on the end to point it out?
Oh, right, okay. Sorry, I've
You win the prize for witness with the most volumes, Ms White. No one else has got to 3 yet.
So, could you just repeat what you said? What you're pointing to us is?
I'm talking about where rehabilitation, or if you like, where overburden is currently being placed from the coal mining operations, and we have material already going into this area here within the mine.
And that's the only part that's been rehabilitated, that large rectangle on the south?
I would have to confirm that there are also there have been some other areas rehabilitated along here, not shaded red, which were done prior to the 2009, and I'd have to also refer to other documents to see if in part further of this northern batter had been done. But by and large, the material that is currently being extracted, or the overburden, is largely unsuitable to go on the batters. It's more suited to go on the mine floor.
So who comes along and reviews the rehabilitation? Whose role is it to do that?
My inspectorate?
Is that the local?
Yes, based here in the valley, yes.
And that's Mr Hayes?
No, the inspector here is Anne Bignell. She reports to the Chief Inspector of Mines or General Manager of Operations.
Okay. And is that an annual visit?
Regularly, inspectors visit the mine to undertake a range of activities, including progress with the work plan, or if work is in accordance with the work plan.
And how often do they visit?
My understanding is they've visited the mine at least, or discussed with the mine management at least 12 times in the past 12 months, and that wouldn't be unusual. They would have regular interactions with the operator of the mine relating to their work plan and any undertakings.
So as far as I understand, the current bits of red on this map have to be completed by 2019, and I was asking you about timing. So that still gives another 5 years.
That's right, on the current schedule.
And so it's quite foreseeable that those remaining areas could still be rehabilitated in 5 years.
That's right. That's what we would be seeking, and we'd be our assessment of work plans would be about reaching that requirement, or those areas would be completed by then.
Thank you. And just one other point of clarification. Ms Richards drew us to progressive rehabilitation in the work plan. So that's paragraph 6.5, which is on page 0752 of this document. And it magically appears. Thank you. Could you just explain to me progressive rehabilitation staging sequencing? The paragraph there reads, there are two major tasks to be completed using overburden. Point 1, coverage of coal batters to provide fire protection. Could you explain to me what that paragraph is in relation to progressive rehabilitation?
Progressive rehabilitation is a requirement under the MRSDA. It's intended to ensure that rehabilitation occurs in a timely way and reduces or minimises the risks of unstable batters or other aspects relating to instability. It also means that if you do progressive rehabilitation, if you like, the liability for the entire rehabilitation is not left to the end of mine life. GDF Sewers have provided this rehabilitation and indicated that by doing this approach, they will enable fire protection as well as ensure that they can grow native vegetation. That's the approach that they're adopting with this. They'll cover the coal batters to provide fire protection and enable vegetation to grow over the batters.
But I thought I heard you say that that the DSDBI don't regulate the coverage of the coal batters to provide fire protection.
No, we don't. But GDF Sewers have made this comment that the batters will be protected in such a way that it would enable this.
And so is that part of these rehabilitation parts that we've just gone through in 1C and 2B? Is that linked somehow?
The aspects that I look for, or that my inspectors look for, are those that relate to ensuring that the progressive rehabilitation deals with mine stability and ensuring that we've got a stable landform.
In 2019, when we expect that Block 1C, that the mining of Block 1C will be completed, what happens if Ms Bignell or her successor arrives at the mine to find that the rehabilitation that's required by the work plan hasn't happened? For example, because Mr Faithful doesn't think he needs to commence doing it until Block 1C's actually been fully mined. What enforcement or compliance action can the inspector take?
I'm sure there would be many conversations prior to that point in 2019 to ensure that, if you like, that position is not left in any doubt. So I would say that there would be avenues to correct any misunderstanding. If we did get to that point in 2019, we could issue notices or penalty notice. Section 110, for example, which we discussed earlier, which has considerable powers relating to rectification or management of particular issues. So we can use those provisions.
So there could be an escalating compliance response.
Yes.
With the ultimate response being a stop work notice.
Ultimately, if that was required, yes, yeah.
Just ask a question. I'm trying to follow the discussion. Who decided which areas to rehabilitate and the timing of that? Does your department engage in that discussion?
We do engage in that discussion, but it's the responsibility of GDF Sewers to outline their rehabilitation plan to ensure that they meet the requirements of the work plan. So it will be largely in GDF Sewers' responsibility to identify how they would do it. But I would say they do that with discussions with our inspectorate or with Earth Resources Regulation, and those kind of discussions would ensure that both ourselves and they had a shared understanding of what were some of the limitations or considerations in determining the pattern of rehabilitation. For example, and I'll just use this as an example, the Northern Batters have a lot of infrastructure adjacent to them relating to the mine's operations, including the groundwater bores and ponds and things such, and horizontal drainage into that batter. In those discussions, those kind of things would come up in those discussions, which would help us understand the pattern for how rehabilitation would be carried out.
So you don't actually exercise any requirements about where to rehabilitate, is that right? You're basically an observer.
I don't know whether just being a passive observer, I don't think that would be a good description. I think the 2009 variation to the work plan, which included the rehabilitation plan, was prompted largely by the department saying that we didn't think the existing plan was going to work, and so what was an alternative and how would we be able to rehabilitate the batters above the water level. So I don't think observer in a passive sense is the way I would describe it. I think it's more actively involved, but it leaves that, as is the right thing to do, the responsibility for the plan is GDF Sewers to prepare and then undertake.
Could I just finally ask a question about your engagement in fire prevention? Given that fire could actually stop the economic production of the mine and power station, wouldn't the department have a view then about that? Albeit maybe workplace safety might be work cover's responsibility, but and under the Act, I mean, the purpose is to encourage the use of these natural resources. So if fire was preventing that, and certainly we heard the fire came very close to the power station, and production could have stopped, wouldn't the department actually be actively interested in avoiding such an event like that?
As the regulator, I don't have an interest in that particular matter other than, and I'd provide some context, that the mine is intended to provide coal to the power station. So its overall objective is to be a mine that produces coal. However, the matters relating to fire in the mine are covered under the Occupation Health and Safety Act. That's the way our regulatory framework has been determined or divided between the regulators. And so, if you like, the matters relating to power supply and whether that may be impacted are more of an interest in the energy sector development part of DSDBI, not in my own.
So just finally, has that section expressed an interest in, if you like, the sustainability of production and whether regulation could, assist that process?
I'm not aware of a discussion such as that, no.
While we're discussing the rehabilitation plan that's in place, I'd like to raise with you a matter that was raised by the Technical Review Board in its most recent annual report, which is the replacement attachment 46 to your statement. And it's in the executive summary.
Thank you.
Yeah, that might make it a little easier to find. So it's in the executive summary on page 4 of the document. At the very bottom of the page, there's a paragraph that reads, "The TRB remains of the opinion that the original measures proposed for the rehabilitation of the Latrobe Valley mines," that's all 3 of them, "fall well short of what could reasonably be considered as adequate for achieving long-term safe and stable batters from a ground control perspective. Experience is now revealing that rehabilitation is a far more complex matter than envisaged when rehabilitation plans were developed as part of the work plans for the mine. Progress is being made in addressing these shortcomings." Now, the Technical Review Board is as its title suggests, a board appointed by the Minister under the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act to provide expert advice, and it was prompted by a number of mine stability issues, both at, I think, principally or initially at Yallourn.
That's right, there was a batter collapse at Yallourn.
Yes, and subsequently there have been issues at Hazelwood.
There has been, yes, with the northern batter.
Yeah. So mine stability is very much the Technical Review Board's area of expertise, but that paragraph identifies an ongoing concern on the part of the Technical Review Board about the adequacy of rehabilitation plans to achieve long-term stability. That's not the first time that opinion's been expressed by the board, is it?
No, they've expressed that prior to now, and in previous reports or documents about stability, they have made reference to the fact that the brown coal mines in the Latrobe Valley have stability or complex stability issues that have perhaps been underestimated or not adequately characterised in the past.
Now, how is that concern that's been expressed by the Technical Review Board, most recently in its annual report for the last financial year, how is that being addressed with the rehabilitation plan for the Hazelwood mine?
So their comments there are related to, as you've outlined, to mine stability. And the way that is being addressed is that we do annual geotechnical audits of all the mines, including Hazelwood. There is a requirement for Hazelwood to prepare a ground control management plan, and that is in preparation. That's our primary means of being able to deal with mine stability. There are ongoing monitoring of the northern batters, real-time monitoring. There are a series of infrastructures that have been built into the northern batter to drain water out of the batter, the horizontal boreholes, the horizontal holes, and there is constant pumping and monitoring of the groundwater levels.
All right, but my question was related specifically to rehabilitation plans and the adequacy of the rehabilitation plans to achieve long-term stability. Now, this concern is expressed in relation to the Latrobe Valley mines, which I assume includes Hazelwood.
That's right, yes.
And the Technical Review Board appears to be of the opinion that the rehabilitation plan for all of the mines is not adequate.
They refer to inadequacies in the consideration of being able to address mine stability issues adequately. That's what they're reference to, and it's further elaborated on page 12 of the same report.
So take us to that.
Page 12, at the bottom of the page, it's almost
word for word
with
that paragraph.
what could reasonably considered as adequate for achieving long-term safe and stable batters from a ground control perspective.
All right, so that's a pretty serious concern expressed by an expert group appointed to express concerns about long-term stability issues. What's being done?
Well, that's what I was just articulating around what's been done at Hazelwood.
Specifically in relation to the longer-term rehabilitation plan.
Well, the longer-term rehabilitation plan will incorporate... A ground control management plan is a significant document. It talks about how the mine will be retained in a safe and stable manner. It describes the way the mine will work and better addresses the requirements under the mines
during the life of the mine.
During the life of the mine, and to enable it to be stable into the future. In addition to that, the legislation and the regulations define these mines as declared mines, which means that the mine operators are required to monitor perhaps more often and more regularly and provide data to support that their operations are occurring in a safe and stable manner. So there are additional requirements that Hazelwood and the other two Latrobe Valley mines are required to undertake. In addition, and we take the Technical Review Board's observations and recommendations very seriously, and that we've been able to incorporate a range of other components. We've established a coal mining centre of expertise at Federation University and things like that to be able to build the capability of mine operators and managers.
Has there been a review of the rehabilitation plan of the Hazelwood mine in light of this concern expressed by the Technical Review Board?
I believe that the rehabilitation approach as identified in the work plan is consistent with the Technical Review Board's understanding of what the rehabilitation program and timing is. I believe the Technical Review Board, though, what they're actually referring to is the understanding and the necessary needs to keep batters stable have not been adequately addressed. And with the mine management and mine operators and ourselves, we are attempting to better understand the risks and make them stable.
Still not clear on the answer to my question. This paragraph identifies very squarely as a concern the adequacy of the rehabilitation plans for the mines, including Hazelwood. Has the rehabilitation plan for Hazelwood been reviewed in light of this concern?
It hasn't been reviewed in light of this concern, largely because the report is it's not very old. It's only just been released. But the considerations that they talk about will be an ongoing feature of how we require rehabilitation to be considered.
So the next question is, can the mine regulator or alternatively the minister prompt a review or require a more stringent rehabilitation plan under the MRSD?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can you explain the mechanism for that? How does that occur?
Either the minister, the department, the minister, or the mine operator can seek a change.
I'd like to ask you about the rehabilitation bond that was fixed for
Yes.
the Hazelwood mine. Now, in your first statement, you said you were not able to shed any light on how the figure of $15 million was arrived at, which is fair enough. You weren't in the role in 1995. But since then, you've been able to uncover some documents that do shed light on that. And they are set out in your supplementary statement. And again, I'll just put my summary understanding to you and check whether I've got it right. Initially, the mine regulator at what was then the Department of Agriculture, Energy and Minerals, so the predecessor of DNRE, fixed the $15 million on an interim basis while estimates of costs were obtained from the mine operator. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of what happened.
And then there were some estimates provided, and you've been able to uncover one of the two documents or letters in which detailed cost estimates were provided by the Hazelwood Power Corporation. And then advice was provided there's a one-page brief that's provided to the Acting Executive Director Resources Development from the Manager Minerals, Petroleum and Operations on the 4th of December. And as I understand it, the estimates indicated that the total current liability for rehabilitation was in the order of $20 million. If we can go to that document, thank you. This is at Annexure 49 to the supplementary statement. So as I understand it, the total current liability for rehabilitation was assessed then at $20 million. The practice at the time was to base a rehabilitation bond on an estimate of the worst case liability. So if the mine operator does no rehabilitation work during the life of the mine, is that correct?
It's generally the rehabilitation is required to reach the minimum standard that would be acceptable or appropriate.
All right, but the usual practice in setting a rehabilitation bond was departed from in this instance because it was considered unlikely that the mine would close before its scheduled end of life and that it would not do the progressive rehabilitation required of it.
It does seem that I can only go by what I see in the same brief, is that they made some, if you like, they made some context-related discussion as to why they came up with a different figure.
And a critical part of that was a requirement that the company continue progressive rehabilitation and meet its progressive rehabilitation obligations.
That's right, yes.
All right. I think we've already established that the amount of the rehabilitation bond has not been reassessed since 1995.
That's right, it was reviewed, I understand, in 2001 and it wasn't changed.
Was it a review of the amount of the bond in 2001?
I can only say that they considered the bond as it was and didn't change it, yes, as it currently stood at $15 million.
And the approval of the expansion of the mine in 2009 may have prompted
Yes.
a review of the assessment methodology used by the mine regulator for assessing rehabilitation bonds, but has not yet resulted in any reassessment of the bond.
No, that's my understanding, is that there was no reassessment of the bond, and I do believe, though, that discussions were probably held at the time with GDF Sewers around whether the bond should be amended, but I don't believe that there was any formal correspondence at that time. I would say, though, that we've reinvigorated, if you like, the bond and the methodology, the rehabilitation bonds and its methodology over recent months. We did commence that before this fire.
What's the reason why it's taken 4 years to... it's 4 years since you began reviewing the assessment methodology, and still you have no new assessment methodology for rehabilitation bonds?
I really can't comment on what happened prior to my time, other than that it did appear from the records that there was an intent to review rehabilitation bonds, and that as a priority, I can only say that it just went down the list. Other matters happened that needed the attention of the regulator, but we are attempting to rectify that now.
All right, and you would agree, would you not, that it is time to review the rehabilitation bond that's required of GDF Sewers?
We consider that, yes, that would be the case, along with other mines.
It's highly unlikely that $15 million would be adequate to complete the rehabilitation works that are required at the end of the 2031 licence period.
I believe that you're correct with that assessment, though I would say that GDF Sewers are still required to do rehabilitation, as I said earlier, regardless of the bond that's held.
Yes.
Yes.
What happens... I'm not suggesting that this would be the case for a moment, but what happens if at the end of the licence period the licensee walks away without completing its rehabilitation obligations?
If that's the case, the bond can be withheld. There is also another provision in the legislation that enables the minister to undertake the rehabilitation and then seek the compensation for that from the mining licence holder.
And it's only the licensee that the minister could look to?
I'd have to double check that, but I believe it's the licence holder, yes.
And so the extent of compensation that the minister might recover would be limited by the assets of the licence holder?
I can't estimate the amount, but there are provisions in the legislation to seek the full costs of any other rehabilitation that the minister may seek or may say is required.
Right, but the reason for having the rehabilitation bond is really by way of a guarantee, is it not?
Oh, that's right, yes.
And so it would be important that the rehabilitation bond at least approximate the likely cost of the minister having to undertake the rehabilitation works.
It could be in the same ballpark or vicinity of what the minister's costs could be. And look, there's no doubt that a rehabilitation bond should reflect the risk profile and be proportionate to the risks. And $15 million in today's terms seems to be an underestimate.
Particularly in light of the very large expansion of the mine in recent years.
Yes.
Can I move now to another area, and that is the history that you've provided us in section E of your statement of outbreaks of fire at the mine. And can I thank you for the very detailed outline that you've given. Before I move into that history, I just want to ask you about the power or the requirement to notify the Chief Inspector of Mines, and you refer to this at paragraph 121 of your statement. The requirement to notify the Chief Inspector of Mines of a reportable event. Now, a reportable event covers a whole range of matters, but includes a major outbreak of fire. A number of the other reportable events are also matters that one would expect would be in the area of a health and safety regulator's responsibility. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
So are you able to enlighten the board about what is the purpose of that requirement to notify the Chief Inspector of Mines of these reportable events that would probably also have to be notified to VWA?
I consider that it's a matter to be reported because it may have an impact on the day-to-day operations or the mining methods that are included in the work plan. It could also have an impact, a fire of a kind may have an impact on mine stability or other areas that we have an interest in. And so it's a way of being able to notify the Chief Inspector and for the Chief Inspector to then have a view about if there's any additional requirements or whether we need to have an additional interest.
Is there a routine consultation with the Victorian Work Cover Authority that occurs after one of these notifications?
I don't believe so. But I would say that we haven't had many notifications of this type.
It's a relatively new requirement.
That's right, yes.
And in fact, the notification of the fire in February 2014 at the Hazelwood mine was the only notification of a major outbreak of fire under this provision.
That's right.
Hazelwood.
That's right.
Now, the notification can just be oral, can be a telephone call or a face-to-face conversation.
That's right. It doesn't specify the nature of the contact or the report.
So it can be oral or in writing, but once the initial notification has been made, the Chief Inspector can request a detailed written report, can he not?
That's right.
And that report can request details of the impact of the event, including on public safety, the likely causes, actions that's been taken to minimise the impact, and critically, action that will be taken to prevent a recurrence of the event. Has Mr Mitas requested such a detailed written report in relation to this fire?
No, he hasn't. And that is largely in response to the fact that the fire continued for a long period, and during that time it was determined that there would be an inquiry. And so in discussions we agreed that there would be the opportunity, in fact the terms of reference for the inquiry were adequate to meet our requirements for the mine fire.
Understood. Now, I appreciate that what you've set out about earlier fires is really what you've been able to extract from archives, and that you had little, if any, personal involvement. But I do want to ask you about a couple of the more recent fires, and if we can move to paragraph 156. Where you deal with the fire that ignited on the 30th of December 2005 in an old fire hole in worked out batters in the southeastern corner of the mine. There was a report prepared which you've provided to us at paragraph 40, which was commissioned by the mine operator. So it was a report for their own internal uses. Have you been able to identify whether there was any follow-up with the mine operator by the mine regulator in relation to the implementation of the recommendations made in that report?
I have no other further information that I can add to that other than that subsequently the mine operator produced a report to say that they had undertaken the investigation, and they would deal with the matters as outlined in the mechanisms that they've got there. So I only have that information to say that they would do that. I have no reason to believe that they didn't undertake those.
All right, but this wasn't one of the fires where an inspector attended and required certain action to be taken.
In this case, my understanding is that an inspector was notified and was involved, but I'm not, other than just, I don't know whether there was any further work that was undertaken by an inspector sometime after this.
That contrasts with the situation in relation to the 2006 fire, the October 2006 fire, which you deal with starting over the page, paragraph 158. So you've identified that there was an investigation jointly by the CFA and the DPI, and you've provided us with copies of both the CFA's report and also the GHD report commissioned by Hazelwood. And then you identify at paragraph 167 that an inspector of mines issued an improvement notice to the licensee to require with the GHD recommendations. Is that a standard compliance step after a major incident?
I think it would be in the case that at that time the Inspector of Mines was responsible for occupational health and safety as well as other matters for the Mineral Resources Development Act.
All right, so as well as there being a report that records the causes of the mine and the possible factors that influenced the course of the fire, there are a number of recommendations, and these were given real teeth, weren't they, by the serving of an improvement notice?
That's correct.
And then, as you identify, you're not, from the beginning of 2008, DPI, as it still was not responsible for health and safety, and so we can look to VWA for action it took in relation to the 2008 and 2012 fires.
That's correct, yes.
Now, the last area in your statement is Part G. You've headed review. And this is in response to an invitation to identify whether there should be any changes to the regulatory framework, either within the legislation that you administer or in relation to the division of responsibility between your agency and other agencies. Can you talk to the board about the issues that you've identified that may need to be addressed? And one of those relates to the prescriptive approach that's currently taken in the MRSD Act.
That's correct, yes. The MRSD Act, as it currently exists, is written in a prescriptive form, so it provides a range of considerations that are to be considered, for example, in work plans or rehabilitation plans, and that differs to, if you say, more contemporary models which are based on an outcomes focus or risk-based analysis, and then all risks are to be identified, and then the mitigations provided and then assessed as to their suitability or not. It has been identified that prescriptive approach may need to be modified to have more of that risk-based or outcomes-focused regulations in the future, and that's been the subject of some recent amendments to the legislation.
All right, which you identify in paragraph 184, and we will then see a new set of requirements for a work plan and what has to be contained in a work plan. And B and C are of particular interest in the current context. So a work plan needs to identify risks that the work may pose to the environment, to any member of the public or to land or property in the vicinity of the work, and specify what the licensee will do to eliminate or minimise the risks as far as reasonably practicable. So to my mind, that includes the risk that worked-out batters might catch fire and burn for some time, causing Morwell to be blanketed in smoke. do you share that assessment?
They could. They're very broad, if you like, provisions that will be included. I believe, though, that I should just mention that that if the VWA or the Occupational Health and Safety Act already has the provisions, and that there would need to be consideration so that they weren't duplicative. But it does provide a much broader assessment of risks than we currently have now with the work plan that I have to currently oversight.
You tell us that provision's likely to come into effect in 2016. That seems like a long lead-in period. Are you able to explain that?
As the administrator of the regulations, I don't actually submit these changes. That's from the regulatory policy part of the department. But I would say, given that the process that we would need to follow, or that would need to be followed to administer these or to introduce these, would probably require a regulatory impact statement, which takes a lengthy period of time. And I would think the 2016 default date probably reflects that.
So it's the must commence by.
That's right,
so
yes.
If not proclaimed by, will come into effect.
Will come into effect, yes.
Is there a need to put regulations in place to underpin this change to work plan contents?
I believe that's the most effective way to be able to articulate clearly to licence holders and the public what is meant by these changes. But sometimes regulations do sometimes follow, but I think the best process or the best principle to follow would to have regulations.
And will that trigger a requirement for existing work plans to be revised to bring them into conformity with what will become Section 40 subsection 3? Or is there a transitional phase?
I think there will be a transitional phase, yes.
So we can't expect in the short term that this will have any impact on the work plan that the Hazelwood mine is working under?
Not immediately, but it does flag a very strong intention to change the approach to work plans, and that given that this is already in the public domain, I would consider that a mine operator would consider this in light of what they're doing today.
And it does potentially give the department head of the regulator the ability to oversee and to work with mine operators about managing the risk of fire.
Yes, as described in paragraph 186, given that the terms are somewhat different to the existing arrangements, it would seem that the department head who is responsible for work plans would have a broader palette, if that's the right way of describing it, a broader range of risks to consider in a work plan. Once again, though, I'll preface those remarks with if we were to address fire risk, that we would seek to have the appropriate expertise and to assist with that, given that we don't currently deal with that in light of the work plan.
Now, another area for reflection is how well the division of responsibilities between regulators has worked in the current environment, or has worked to address what is a risk that worked out batters of exposed coal will catch fire. Have you been involved in any discussion about different ways of regulators working to address those risks in future?
Yes, I have.
Yes.
I've discussed regulatory models along the lines of the one that we have, where as a number of regulators with defined responsibilities versus other models that tend towards more centralised regulatory models that exist elsewhere. Both models, or if you like, the spectrum of those models exist in other places.
My question is really more focused about how the various regulators who have responsibility for regulating the mine, which is specifically the mine regulator, Victorian Work Cover Authority, the fire services, and possibly the EPA, how they can work better together in future to manage the risk that we all clearly now know exists. Any ideas?
I think a model that the one you described, which is based on a collaborative model, has a lot of strengths, and that each organisation has, if you like, a depth of expertise that can be brought to deal with a regulatory framework, or that can strengthen a regulatory framework for a very complex mine, such as the one as Hazelwood or other mines like that. I think what you're talking about is whether we can improve practices to better account for all risks. I'm sure there is room to move, and I'd be pretty happy to be involved in ways of strengthening that model.
Which agency would you see as being the lead agency in that exercise?
I'm not sure whether I can point to a lead agency, but I can see ourselves and the VWA in particular having an interest in strengthening that model.
Now, the board also asked you to address whether one possible measure that could be taken to mitigate the fire risk in the worked out batters in future would be bringing forward rehabilitation works. Is that a feasible risk reduction measure that might be taken in future?
I think if I point to Paras 189, I would welcome the opportunity to consider whether the rehabilitation plan could be altered, or in a way that would have another, if you like, objective, which would be to mitigate against fire risk. I think that's something that the fires of February just, if you like, would indicate that we should, and I'm happy to do that. The other aspects that I say in 189, in paragraph 189, are, if you like, a series of considerations that if we were to do that, we'd need some answers to be able to determine if it was feasible. And it's not to say that it's not feasible, it's just that I think there's a considered piece of work or range of work that would need to be done, and we'd need to consult with GDF Sewers around what can be achieved, given that it's actually up to them to be responsible for rehabilitation.
All right, so quicker rehabilitation of the worked out areas of the mine is one possible measure that might be taken to mitigate the risk in future, but it's a complex area.
Yes.
And it would require a number of technical inputs before it could be identified as a reasonably practicable measure.
That's right, and even just sourcing suitable overburden would be a major consideration.
I should cover that off. What is the issue with the overburden that's been collected from stage one?
You need to talk to a soil scientist for all of the technical detail. However, my understanding is that the overburden being produced is too wet and has unsuitable characteristics to be used as batter stabilisation material. So its most effective use is to be put on the floor of the mine to provide stability to the floor. So it does. The batter requires soils and overburden that will stay in place, not erode, and will also enable some other form of cover, vegetative cover, to grow on them. So it needs to have that kind of characteristic.
So full rehabilitation of the worked out batters may be one measure, but you would accept, I take it, that there might be some measures short of full rehabilitation that might achieve acceptable risk control.
Yes, and that might include a range of measures from fire suppression through to fire prevention actions, which we'd like to talk further with the Fire Services Commissioner and the VWA.
Thank you. Those are the questions I had for Ms White. Do members of the board have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. White. Just to clarify then, we're talking this week around regulatory compliance. It's your view that the current mine owner has not breached any of the MSD Act?
That is my view, yes.
And that's directly related to the fact that the first checkpoint, if you like, for the progressive rehabilitation under the current revised work plan is 2019.
That's right, for aspects relating to rehabilitation, yes.
Thank you. I'm advised that Ms Nichols for Environment Victoria has some questions.
Sorry, Ms Nichols, just before you do, I just want to clarify with Ms White about those suggestions for improvement, and I welcome those and appreciate that very much. I think you mentioned that you would need some further professional advice or someone to help drive some of these considerations. So could you just talk about what would be a suggested way to approach some of these modifications or to either the legislation or the regulations around inclusion of fire risk? I think you talked about working with Victorian Work Cover Authority or WorkSafe and the Fire Service Commissioner. So could you just expand on that a little bit further about next steps?
I guess what I would say that this is my view around that. I think it would require us to come together as that group. There may be others that I haven't considered which would have an interest, other government agencies. I believe we'd need to have technical experts that would be able to provide us with advice around mine stability and issues relating to ensuring that the Northern Batter in particular remains stable while we, or during any other rehabilitation program that we may come up with. We'd need to have fire expertise. We'd need to look to see whether we could make all these changes within the current regulatory frameworks that already exist, and so it's a matter of practice improvement, or if we, in order to clarify or to make it more obvious, whether there'd need to be legislative or legal change. But I think first up it would be about bringing the most relevant and people together with the expertise that would enable a robust consideration of what a rehabilitation plan would look like if we were to consider or further consider fire risk during the life of the mine and mitigation. I think the other part of it, though, just without wanting to just go down the list, I noted some points from A to H. Of course, the feasibility or the cost of doing such works would ultimately have to be considered as well.
Thank you.
Ms White, my name is Lisa Nichols. I appeal for Environment Victoria. It's correct, is it not, that a cornerstone of the Mineral Resources Sustainable Development Act is the obligation on the licence holder to conduct progressive rehabilitation during the life of the mining works?
It is a requirement for progressive rehabilitation under the Act.
Yes. And Section 81 of the Act requires that the licensee must rehabilitate the land in the course of doing the work under the authority and must, as far as is practicable, complete the rehabilitation before the mine work ceases. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
And you explain in your statement that the rationale for that is to limit the risk that all of the mining or all of the rehabilitation will not be completed by the end of the mining work.
But in addition to that, it's also about being able to do rehabilitation during the life of the mine to protect the mine from other matters which may be stability issues or something like that.
Indeed. So there's really a dual purpose. One is to make sure that once you get to the end of the mining life, rehabilitation is done and you can be satisfied by having it done during the life of the mine that it will be finished when the mine is finished. But also there are protective functions to be served by the rehabilitation that occurs along the way. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes. And in the context of the mining licence, that is reflected in condition 15, which requires that progressive rehabilitation be undertaken.
That's right. That's a requirement in the licence and also in the legislation more broadly.
And in the original work plan, that requirement was really to be implemented in 5-year rolling plans, which were to be updated on an annual basis.
That's right, yes.
And the master plan for the rehabilitation concept, which commenced in 1996, anticipated that there would be 3 stages: an operative phase for parts of the mine, post-operative, and mine closure phase. Is that right? And in relation to post-operative, which relates to parts of the mine as they finish their working life, it provided that during the life of the mine, the post-operative phase, rehabilitation would occur progressively and at the earliest practical opportunity after the land is no longer required for rehabilitation.
That's how it's written, yes.
Yep. And is that still the requirement?
It has, the mining licence conditions are still there and in place. The work plan has been varied a number of times, and the rehabilitation plan from 1996 has been changed and it was changed in 2009.
Yes, but it's still the requirement that during the life of the mine, progressive rehabilitation occur at the earliest practical opportunity after the land is no longer required for operations.
That's correct, yes.
And on a slightly different topic, you don't disagree, do you, that exposed coal in a brown coal mine, especially when it exists in high vertical walls in worked out batters, is a known fire risk?
Exposed coal is a fire risk, yes.
Yes. And that's especially relevant on hot, windy days, such as are experienced in February or thereabouts in the Latrobe Valley.
Coal faces are susceptible to fire in a variety of weather conditions, but those ones in particular would raise the risk.
And this particular mine, the Hazelwood mine, exists in a high bushfire risk area.
I'm aware of that, yes.
Yes. And without repeating the matters Ms Richards took you to, it has been known by the mine regulator for many years that worked out batters do pose a risk of quickly escalating fire, which is difficult to contain.
I would say that the regulators, ourselves and VWA, are aware that fire risk in a mine is high and that fires can quickly take hold, yes.
And so do you agree with the proposition that in relation to controlling the risk of fires, in coal mines, particularly brown coal mines, the emphasis needs to be on prevention at least as much as it is on suppression?
You're now stepping outside of the area of my expertise and where I regulate in the MRSDA, so matters relating to fire prevention and suppression probably best asked to others.
All right, will do. In the context of rehabilitation, you say in your statement that in relation to fire safety, rehabilitation is managed by the mine's code of practice. Is that correct?
Which paragraph are you referring
paragraph
to?
Paragraph 93 of your statement.
At the time of 1996, that's the case?
Yes. And is that still the case, given that there is a revised version of the Code of Practice and has been since that time?
I'm not aware of whether it is still utilised. I'm no longer responsible for matters relating to fire.
Mm-hmm. Just want to ask you some questions about the nature of rehabilitation. It's correct, is it not, that whilst rehabilitation is the process of restoring land that's been used in a mine to its earlier capacity, it also can serve as a matter of practice a fire mitigation function, can't it?
It could in another regulatory model, but under the framework that I work within, which is under the MRSDA, it doesn't have a function as you describe.
I'm asking you about the practicality of this matter. It's well known, is it not, to the mine regulator that covering exposed coal batters with overburden or alternatively with soil or clay will reduce fire risk.
It's known that I would agree with you that covering exposed batters with overburden would assist for fire mitigation purposes, but that's not the purpose under which I regulate rehabilitation plans.
Can I ask you just briefly, please, to have a look at the 2009 work plan, and do you have a copy of that there?
Yes.
It may actually come up on the screen. If we can be shown, please, paragraph 6.5 of the document. I just want to take you back very briefly to something Ms. Peterson took you to a moment ago. You've got paragraph 6.5 there.
Yes.
You're familiar now with the statement that there are two major tasks to be completed using overburden. One, coverage of coal batters to provide fire protection, and a nutrient base to support plant growth that in turn provides long-term batter stability. And two, placement of the balance of overburden on the material of the floor of the mine. Now, I would, in relation to these rehabilitation and work plans, these documents are approved by the mine regulator, aren't they?
That's correct.
And so the approval process for a document such as this one would involve people in your department going through this document very carefully and checking each of the statements made in the document to see whether it conforms with regulatory policy.
In accordance with the regulatory policy under the MRSDA, yes.
Yes. And a mining operator cannot engage in mining activities unless it has a work plan which is approved by the mining regulator, can it?
That's right, the department head is responsible.
All right. So when you were answering Ms. Petering's question a short while ago, you referred to this part of the work plan or the rehabilitation plan as a comment by GDF Sewers.
I think I noted that was GDF Sewers' objective, where they noted that they would be able to rehabilitate the batters to also enable fire protection. But
that comment, if you like, appears in a document which has been approved by your department.
That's correct.
And it acknowledges, doesn't it, that an important practical aspect of rehabilitation, when it concerns covering exposed coal batters, is to prevent fire.
GDF Sewers do acknowledge that, but I would once again say that under the regulatory framework that I'm responsible for, that is not a factor for us, for me.
As a matter of fact, though, your department is aware that covering exposed coal batters with rehabilitation material, including overburden, is a very important and effective fire risk mitigation strategy.
And that is part of the rehabilitation plan for the end of mine life, where following on from the mine's activities, that it would be rehabilitated and be safe, stable, and there is that it doesn't increase the fire risk in post its life. Yes.
Yes, but it's also, it has the same function in the context of progressive rehabilitation, doesn't it?
It could have the same function, but that would not be a primary reason for us to seek progressive rehabilitation, which does relate to the safe and stable batters of the mine.
But it would be a reason to seek it, wouldn't it?
It could be a reason, but not within my regulatory remit.
Would you accept then that if it can have a consequence in terms of fire mitigation, that decisions made by the mining regulator to enforce or not to enforce rehabilitation requirements for the covering of coal batters could have an effect on fire risk?
The rehabilitation that I'm required to oversight is rehabilitation to be completed during the life of the mine, and in this case it's up to 2032, If there are other considerations relating to fire or some other risks that could be considered in that, I'm quite happy to have the other regulators or other agencies approach me, and they have not.
Yes, but as a matter of fact, if the mining regulator makes the decision, for example, to require the coverage of coal batters for whatever reason as part of rehabilitation, or not to require it, that kind of decision can practically impact on the risk of fire at the mine.
As a mining regulator, and I'm not the only mining regulator, but as a mining regulator with the responsibilities that I have to oversight, the matters that I deal with are not exactly as you've just described them. And given that the rehabilitation plan is intended for a stable, long-term arrangement, that is what my regulatory oversight is largely to do. Covering of coal batters for other reasons can also be included, but it hasn't been included in the rehabilitation plan, and it's not included in the conditions or, if you like, the requirements of a rehabilitation plan to date.
Well, it is with respect included in the rehabilitation plan, is it not, at 6.5?
GDF Sewers have provided that as, which demonstrates their purposes. It's not required in the schedule that refers to rehabilitation plans in the MRSDA.
So is that the logic with which you approach this question, to look at the items in Schedule 15 and to determine by reference to that schedule whether you are required to regulate for those purposes?
That's correct.
All right. But finally, I'll just put this to you. What I'm really saying is that a consequence of what you regulate or fail to regulate, according to your set of statutory powers, could be, and likely is, to affect fire risk at the mine or the mines you regulate.
I don't think I agree with your premise.
Are you suggesting that it would be appropriate for the mining regulator to ignore the risk of a fire risk that might arise from failing to enforce or enforcing a requirement to cover exposed coal batters?
I'm not saying that I was remiss or I failed to undertake my duties. I'm actually saying that the duties that you are ascribing to me are not the ones in the Act. That's all I'm trying to clarify.
But you're not suggesting, are you, that when considering a rehabilitation plan, that the mining regulator might, among other reasons, decide that it is appropriate to require the covering of exposed coal batters, provided it was consistent with other objectives, because it assisted fire protection in the mine?
It's really not currently in the MRSDA that I, on behalf of the Minister or the Deputy Head, have those powers. It could be in other regulatory frameworks, and I'd suggest the Occupational Health and Safety Act already has those provisions.
Are you suggesting, to be clear, that it is not permissible for the mining regulator to take into account the risk of fire that might be caused by exposed coal batters not being rehabilitated?
I'm saying that another agency with responsibilities for the mining framework does have those already.
To accept that, is it impermissible for a mining regulator to take into account the risk of fire in a mine that might be caused or enhanced by a failure to cover up exposed coal batters?
Would you be able to just break that sentence up into 2 or 3 parts? Because I feel like I've answered the question and I'm unsure of which part I haven't.
Yes, certainly. Let's assume you might have a number of objectives you want to address when you are deciding to approve a rehabilitation plan or require certain elements to be in that plan. Let's assume, for the purposes of the question, that the rehabilitation issue you are considering is whether or not exposed coal batters should be rehabilitated by covering. Let's assume, for the purpose of the question, that is relevant for some purpose other than fire. Right?
Rehabilitation of the coal batters, according to legislation, that's the MRSDA, is around ensuring that there is a safe and stable end position for the mines. If it was to be addressed, if it was to include other risks that needed to be addressed, of course they could be considered. They are currently not, but I'm open to any, if you like, other options that could assist.
Thank you. I think that answers my question.
Okay.
Just in relation to the fire that commenced on the 9th of February this year, at the time of commencement of the fire, there were approximately 3,000 hectares in the mine that had been mined out and was, all things being equal, available for rehabilitation and not rehabilitated. Is that correct?
I think I would say that there are parts of the mine that have had some rehabilitation since 1996 when the mine was privatised. There are rehabilitation areas on the floor of the mine and in some areas around the batters. At the time of the fire, though, many of the areas in the northern batter had not been fully rehabilitated, and largely because of the infrastructure that exists.
Yes, and do you know whether or not the unrehabilitated area measured about 3,000 hectares?
It would be in that order.
Yes, and the fire burned in various parts of the mine, but including in the south-eastern section of the eastern batters, where remediation was scheduled to commence in 2028. Is that right?
I'd have to just double check, but if you're sure, I'll go with that.
Yes. And it also burned in parts of the northern batters where some rehabilitation had been conducted. Is that right?
That's right. There has been some in the northeastern corner.
Yes. And does your department have a standard against which it checks whether sufficient application of overburden has been applied to exposed coal batters?
At the time of the work plan being approved, there is an extensive description of how the winning of coal will occur and how the overburden will be removed and then distributed around the mine to provide the rehabilitation. So yes, we do monitor that.
Yes. And is there any standard concerning the thickness with which overburden material will be applied to exposed coal batters?
I believe that there are some standards that relate to ensuring the batters are of a suitable slope so that they remain stable and that they are covered with adequate overburden and topsoil to enable revegetation.
And do you know whether that standard had been applied and inspected against in relation to the parts of the northern batters that had been rehabilitated and burnt in the fire?
I have no reason to believe that the standards have not been met.
Yes, but do you know whether an inspection was carried out before the fire to test that issue?
The areas that have been rehabilitated, and this goes to your earlier questions, the area that have been rehabilitated were not subject to fire to any large extent.
Some were, though, weren't they?
In some areas, yes, but that area in the northeastern corner in particular, not so.
Yes, but some parts of the northern batters were.
Oh, yes, for sure, yes.
All right. And some parts of is it correct that fire burned in some parts of the unremediated parts of the mine that had been mined out for quite some years?
They were the northern batter in particular, the northeastern corner was where the mine started in the late 50s, and so they had been, it had been worked out many years ago.
And is the implication then that since work had commenced in that area, nothing had been done to protect the exposed coal faces?
I don't think I would describe it as nothing. There have been some rehabilitation, as I mentioned, in that northeastern corner and on the floor of the mine where the ash is distributed. And in regards to the rest of the batters, from the time of the privatisation or prior to that time, it was always envisaged that the lake would be filled, and there wasn't a deliberate plan to rehabilitate batters from the floor to the surface because it was believed that they would fill with water.
And I think Ms Richards took you to this before, the filling of the void with water was anticipated to take possibly up to 500 years, is that right?
So it says, yes.
And Mr Faithful gives some evidence about the current or revised plan for the filling of the void with water. And is this correct, that even the filling of the reduced amount of the void that will now be filled will take, in the first instance, about 6 years to do the first part of that?
That's the plan, yes. That, to use that 6-year level.
And then it will take how much longer to reach the desired final level for filling the void?
It's then anticipated that the water level will rise very slowly over time, and that the batters will be rehabilitated for a safe and stable environment to that water level.
And when you say slowly over time, do you mean, can you say a matter of decades or longer?
It is likely to be decades, yes, but the rehabilitation does come down to the water level.
Yes.
And even below the water level, because there is a need to put overburden on the floor of the mine.
Yes. And whilst the void is waiting for the water to fill it, the exposed coal batters will be left uncovered, is that right?
There are progressive rehabilitations from now until 2032 to ensure that the batters are rehabilitated so that they will not be exposed post the mine life.
But the batters will there be batters in the part of the mine that will eventually be filled with water?
My understanding of that, there will be minimal water on the northern end of the mine, which will necessitate the batters on the northern side of the mine to be rehabilitated more fully, and then as you move across the mine there will be less, if you like, depth of batter that will need to be rehabilitated to that with no overburden and so on.
Yes, but there will be some batters in parts of the mine that will eventually be submerged in water, but which will be exposed until that occurs.
I think given that it's the 6-year water level, the amount of batter at that time will be far less than the full extent that you see today.
Yes. But there is, for the batters that will be submerged in water eventually, the plan is just to wait until they're submerged.
That's correct.
Yes. Can I ask some questions about the 2009 plan? Do you have the rehabilitation plan there? Can I ask you to have a look at page 6.1, please? Right down the bottom of the page, there is the comment under the heading infrastructure. At the very last sentence, opportunities for progressive rehabilitation are therefore not necessarily consistent with opportunities for access to areas requiring rehabilitation. And I'm sorry, I should have read the sentences preceding that, which is that rehabilitation options and scheduling of rehabilitation are subject to a number of siting and timing constraints. IPRH operating infrastructure on permanent batters prevents access, and IPRH and community infrastructure around the mine perimeter affects the ability to cut batters back and reduce slopes. Is that the infrastructure matter you referred to before?
Yes, it is.
Yes. And just in that context, can I ask you to have a quick look at the progress report which is attached to, as Appendix B to the rehabilitation plan? Can you please go to page, I don't think it has page numbers, it's the reference on the top right-hand corner is ends in .0819 and it's under the heading 2, Other Overburden Dumps Rehabilitation Projects. Do you have that?
Is it number 2, Other Overburden Dumps? Yes.
The last sentence there reads, the mine permanent northern perimeter batters have not been rehabilitated due to the large amount of infrastructure remaining which is still required for many years to come. Now that comprised part of the 2008 progress report which was attached to the work plan. Board members, Mr Chairman, sorry, is that a convenient time?
Some idea of from other people as to how long they're likely to be. I then refer back to Ms Richards.
I've had no indication from anyone else that I've had no indication from anyone else that they have questions for this witness.
So
I will have about 15 minutes of questions.
How long do you think you'll be, Ms Nichols?
I will be no more than 20 minutes, probably 15.
That sounds like half an hour, and therefore it's inappropriate to just do it now, and therefore we'll just have to make allowances for whatever happens this afternoon. Yes, we'll adjourn now for 2 o'clock.
All stand.